Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Inside Boxing Weekly. I'm your host for tonight, as my good pastor is absent. He's doing the family thing, and he's out and about. So I'm going to be I'm going to be captaining the ship here on this Sunday. And with me, as always, is John Einreinhofer, a resident lawyer. How you doing, John?
Good to be here, Jeremiah. Tonight's going to be a lot to rant on, so I'm anxious to get going and pull the ripcord and start ranting about a dreadful weekend.
Yeah. I think in preparation for this show, John and I both had to eat our Wheaties because we needed a lot of energy for this one. I threw back a few monsters. I had a big bowl of cereal, and I'm raring to go.
Yeah, caffeine loading was definitely needed for this one. There's a lot to rant about, and it's all equally deserved. So we can't let up.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, since this show is independent, we get to pass around the just desserts anywhere and everywhere. I mean, and I know with boxing, it's become more of a fractured state. You got guys working for certain companies, and they're clearly biased towards one entity or the other. In this, we've got no association whatsoever, so we're just going to call it like we see it. And with that said, we're going to start on Friday night, so this is where it all started, and I'm happy it did so. I'm actually happy that they put this on Friday as opposed to Saturday, because it would have been just far too much to consume. I'm a boxing fan, but I couldn't even digest everything that they had on Saturday, so, let alone put another card on there. So we're going to start with the prospects on the top-ranked show. We're going to go with Alexander Putin. Putin, to me, he's a guy that I wrote about. He was on my prospect watch list. I think if anybody is a stylistic comparison of Vasyl Lomachenko at 147, I think it's him. I think he's the closest representative to what you have there. I know they're buddies. They train in the same gym. All you got to do is follow Putin around on his social media portals, especially Instagram, and you can see that there's an affinity there. And I think the kid is pretty good. He's under top-ranked banner. So that means, unfortunately, he's got Terrence Crawford to look forward to. He's not obviously ready for that level of competition, but I think he's a good fighter. He's aggressive. He's got good footwork, good hand speed. He hits pretty hard, but he's definitely not one of those one-punch kind of guys. What do you think of his performance, John?
Actually, Jeremiah, he's got some talent, and I do see the Lomachenko comparisons, but I think there's a big opportunity there for him with Top Rank desperately needing welterweight opponents for Crawford. If they're willing to make a decent in-house fight, they got to prove that too. But presuming they are at some point, I thought this was a big opportunity for Putin, and not on the main undercard, but at least in the Lomachenko undercard, the early undercard. But one point I disagree with you. I thought he had talent, but he was not aggressive. Really that aggressive. He won the fight easily, but he wasn't in with anybody formidable, and he was doing what you're seeing a lot of these guys, not all, it's hard to generalize with all regions and systems or countries, but sometimes you can with some styles, we know that, and I'm seeing too much from guys from the former Soviet bloc, the Eastern Europeans, and I saw this with Putin Friday, that he's so much in that amateur, the modern amateur mentality where it was point scoring, where you land some punches on the guy and then you don't get hit because the other guy would be racking up points, like literally in the old amateur system. Now, there's nothing wrong with good boxing, hit and don't get hit. I'm not saying that, but there's no time with a lot of these guys, and I saw that with Putin. They don't want to stay in there and engage at all. And Ray Mancini, we'll get to that later, but Ray Mancini called Vinechenko out for that Saturday night, and I agreed with him. And that is what I'm talking about. I'm seeing a lot lately that these guys just, they don't. I mean, it's like the concept of them maybe throwing one punch and taking a punch. Not that you want to get hit with a bomb, but just in other words, to land with some power is just completely foreign to these guys. And I'm finding it frustrating to watch. Matter of fact, we weren't going to talk about it, but it's worth talking about because it fits too. The Kazakh middleweight, Janibek is his first name. He goes by his first name because his last name's hard to pronounce. That was the second time they threw him on one of these early undercards too, and he just puts you to sleep. He does it to such an extreme, much worse than Putin. This guy just puts you to sleep. That's a rant right there. I've seen him twice. No more, please. So that was some problems from the early top rank undercard, and we're just getting rolling. And of course, it was on ESPN Plus. So how many people see it? You really got to wonder.
Yeah, and I would attribute some of that. Again, I was talking about Putin in some of the other fights that I've seen him, and he did seem aggressive against like Prescott. He did have some of that for sure. But I think part of that, like you said, is attributed to the amateur system where you touch a guy and then you get out. You don't take any return fire. And I think, or at least I thought, a lot of the guys came to America to hone those skills. I was watching, James Toney versus Glenn Wolfe the other day, and, Toney had no problem at all just, standing in the pocket, flipping punches, putting his back against the ropes. And he's a rarity, in that regard, in how good he was at ducking and dodging punches against the rope and at those close quarters. But it is one of those skills that you really want to learn. I just think you're wasting a lot of energy if you either got to be in or you got to be out. I think it's easier a lot of times, especially with these guys' skills. Putin, he's got some defensive capability, so does Lomachenko. I think that's where Lomachenko kind of separates himself a bit. But a lot of these guys have the capability to do so. But like you said, it's just, I think from the amateur days, they're just set in their ways and it's hard to break. And I thought coming to America, they would get some of that stuff. A guy like Buddy McGirt, who was an old school guy, would, he seems like one of those guys who could teach some of these guys something like that. But it's hard to say exactly what's going on. Anyways.
Yeah, I like McGirt a lot, but you make an excellent point because I was disappointed because I like McGirt a lot. He teaches guys how to box well, but he came up with an American style like you made an excellent job pointing out, and you did hit on exactly what I'm talking about. A traditional American defensive style, you're slipping punches, you're staying there more. You're not always moving, wasting that energy. And McGirt was able to do that, but he's not getting that across to Janibek. And he is his trainer, so that's a little bit of a disappointment that nothing from McGirt there is coming out into an American style. And people now sometimes are even because some of the opposition wasn't that great, maybe poking a little fun at it. But I'm going to give, looking back, I did at the time, I'm reminding myself, I'm going to give Golovkin some credit for that, the quote-unquote Mexican style, because even though I'd be the first to say he hasn't really used that when he's been up against his very best opposition, he's reverted some, but he did do that in that knockout streak and getting rid of, opponents that he should, and fighting in that style. It was a change for him coming over here, like you said. And I like it. Looking back, because look, to his credit, what you can say in hindsight is he had, 19 knockouts in a row. That built his name. That built him into, as far as nowadays goes, where there's really not many true boxing stars, at least on some level of stardom in the United States, even if it's within the boxing community. And, if he wasn't knocking people out like that, if he was just moving in and out against those opponents, that might have never happened. And Lomachenko, we're going to talk about him, but to his credit, I think you almost saw right after that second pro fight against Salido that he made the mental adjustment that, I've got these skills, but, I've got to tune it up to get some of these guys out of there.
Agreed. Okay, and on to somebody who had a solid amateur background. We talk about Arnold Barboza Jr. He was 20-0 with 8 knockouts going into this fight, or 7 knockouts. Sorry, 20-0 with 7 knockouts going into this fight, and he was fighting a Mike Alvarado, who I believe is 37, 38 at this point. And I'm pretty familiar with Mike Alvarado. Anybody who's been listening to the show for an extended period of time knows that I am from Denver. I live on the south side of Denver right now. Not in the city itself, but I've been here, big part of my life. I'm pretty familiar with Alvarado. I've seen him live twice. I saw him in the first Brandon Rios fight in California. I saw him in the third Alvarado fight in Colorado. And, I'm pretty familiar with I've actually been to his gym as well. I've never met him personally. Never really had that much desire to with his reputation, but Alvarado, to me, this is sort of the end of an era. And again, Alvarado's not a great fighter, but with his reputation, he's seen by a lot of people in the know as sort of a poor man's version of Johnny Tapia. And I don't necessarily refer that to skill, but the way he lived. So he lived a hard life. Anybody who's not aware, he was big on cocaine. Was in bar fights. If anybody remembers. What was the fight in particular? They were talking about he had a slash on his face. Well, that was from a bar fight. Alvarado lived a hard life. He fought hard, and now, again, it's the end of the line for him. Alvarado, of course, it was only a matter of time. They brought him back up with a bunch of soft touches, and I think, like most others, it was just kind of, we were waiting. We were waiting for this sort of result to happen. I didn't expect such a quick knockout from Barboza, who's not considered a puncher, but he got the job done, landed a real nice right hand, and that was all she wrote.
Yeah, I think, again, this was bad because, Mike Alvarado was a pretty good fighter at one time, and he was in, some great entertaining fights, but it's not that people can't make a mistake, and boxing's the roughest sport, but I guess you were at that fight, Jeremiah. When you saw what happened in the third Rios fight, and then his problems got even more documented after that, and they were so bad that, the guy, like you said, he was in with all soft touches, and you just looked at who he had fought when they were bringing him back, and I'd been saying, during that whole time, I thought they're really delaying it, but as soon as he gets in with a live body, it's going to be ugly. And, Barboza was that guy, and Barboza had not been a puncher going in, but, it just really, to me, not a good situation. And then there it is again on Top Rank's ESPN Plus televised undercard, and finally Alvarado in with the live body and Barboza, and you knew it was going to end up something like where he left off with the third Rios fight, but he took a big shot, like you said. Barboza did, what he had to do and what he could do with that situation, which is he's not a puncher, but he got him Alvarado out decisively. So you give him that. But when it ended, I was thinking, what was Top Rank really doing with Alvarado, bringing him back with these, difficulties, and then put him in this type of situation. And even though it didn't end up happening, let's face it, it was close. You found yourself, at least I found myself thinking, they were close to putting him in with like Pacquiao. I mean, it just, again, just Top Rank, just what was this? Just more of the dreadful stuff that happened this weekend.
Yeah, just the fact that he was thrown around as a legitimate opponent for one of their top dogs is distressing, to say the least. But, yeah, it is what it is, and he got knocked out, and I can imagine that he's only going to hang up the gloves from here, but, of course, it's boxing. You never really know. He might, go local or whatever it may be. But we're going to move on to another really, really good fight. Again, the quality just improved the entire time. And we talked about the odds going in, about how everything was, virtually a 50-50. Aram is getting his stuff together.
Yeah. In our fantasy world. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways. Yeah. Okay. So we're moving on to Gilberto Ramirez versus Tommy Karpin. And Karpin he wasn't completely in the dark. Some people did know him because he upset Chad Dawson in his comeback. I think he even knocked Chad Dawson down. I could be mistaken there. But he did knock Alexander Gvozdzik down. That's sort of his claim to fame there. And, he's a scrappy guy. Typically he doesn't lie down. He's game. In this fight, I don't know. Gilberto Ramirez, to me, he looked awfully big. They said he was 196 pounds. And to me, that just said he should have been out fighting at one. I mean, you and I have talked about this at length.
For years,
Gilberto Ramirez looks, for years. We said that, Gilberto Ramirez was a big 168-pounder. That class isn't worth much anyways. And he just looks like a full-fledged 175-pounder. He was a big guy. And Karpin he didn't really do anything to entertain the crowd much. I mean, he had a few counter punches here and there, but he just, I don't know, he didn't really show much in my opinion, and Ramirez just did what he did. He just threw a lot of punches, and eventually, got the stoppage. Nothing spectacular or anything. Karpin checked out. I forget what it was, maybe a rib injury. What did you think of the performance?
I think Ramirez like when he fights pretty well, but Karpin, like you said, he just checked out. But I've got to, and I'm not calling Andre Ward and Tim Bradley out specifically, because this could be any set of announcers in boxing or writers on Twitter, social media, columns who fall into this too. But those were the two guys that did it Friday night. I've got to point this out because it fits into just what you said, and it was literally the theater of the absurd about the lack of understanding about meaningless weight classes in boxing. When the bell rang for round one of Gilberto Ramirez and Tommy Karpin, Andre Ward and Tim Bradley talked about Karpin being the bigger guy because he had been fighting at light heavyweight, and Gilberto Ramirez had to get used to taking on bigger guys. Well, Gilberto Ramirez is 6'2.5", with a longer reach than Karpin, and like you said, reports were he came into the ring at 198 pounds. Karpin's 5'11". I mean, Gilberto Ramirez is the much bigger guy than Tommy Karpin, but because Gilberto Ramirez was making an alphabet-created weight class we don't need of 168 pounds, Andre Ward and Tim Bradley were talking about it like it was a factor in what abilities and what was going to play out with the fight. And all kinds of people do it on Twitter, all kinds of writers and do it. I'm saying right now it's asinine. Stop doing it. Stop not looking at the history of boxing and thinking that these alphabet weight classes like 168 pounds came about for any kind of safety reason or any kind of need, or because you needed a weight class in that area. It was just simply for the alphabet organizations to get more sanctioning fees and make money, like they create belts all the time. It has nothing to do with what plays out in the ring or what factors there are in fights. And you see people who should know better making analysis like that. And this to me, it was a good time to point it out because it was laughable. It was absurd. Gilberto Ramirez is a much bigger guy than Tommy Karpin, period.
Yep.
And when he did his thing, Karpin was out of there quickly.
Yeah, I don't know, I was just thinking to myself that Andre Ward should have known better. I mean, there really wasn't. I mean, he did that sort of thing when he was moving up to 175, like he had to adjust to it. And then when he fought Sullivan Barrera, the transition was seamless. That wasn't his first fight at 175, but the transition was seamless for the guy. And so, just us knowing that Ramirez was already a real big guy, I just thought that, Bradley and Ward lacked a little nuance there. And, Ward is a bright guy. He certainly knows the game, but I'm with you. I just think they got it wrong there. They were just making too much about it. And obviously they were wrong because we saw what happened. I mean, Ramirez looked like the bigger guy, and he proved the bigger guy.
Right. I think you make a good point. I thought it at the time, too. Andre Ward is very smart. I mean, I like him as a commentator. I think he had, and even if it's subconscious, he's got a bias there because he was a light heavyweight in the amateurs. He did the slight weight cutting thing down to the alphabet class of 168, and especially the Europeans, because there was British guys that fought in that class when the alphabet's created. They were all into that class, and you had a lot of Europeans in the Super 6 tournament. So, indirectly, Andre Ward, I think, kind of gets sucked into that 168-pound justification thing. He never needed the weight. I mean, let's point out another absurd situation because it does fit with this Karpin-Ramirez thing, and it'll tie in Andre Ward directly. And I think it'll show that it was something Andre Ward didn't need to do. Does anybody in hindsight think that Andre Ward needed Chad Dawson to cut down to 168 pounds to beat him and knock him out? I mean, he could have picked up the light heavyweight title right there and then, instead of all these machinations of, Dawson's got to come down to 168 and he's going to try to pick up a 168-pound trinket. it was just it's just you look back on that. What was all that? It was, and Dawson was a guy who started his career at middleweight, 160 pounds. It was just asinine. I mean, this stuff is just it just clouds all the analysis of boxing, and it makes it hard for observers, at least a lot of them, to just talk coherently about it.
Yep, it just felt like a stretch too far and a bit unnecessary, like you said. Anyways, on to the main event for Friday night. So this one is obviously, got enough airplay. Vasyl Lomachenko. It seems like he's kind of, added the more traditional first name to his resume. So we're going to start with that. He fought Anthony Croy, and I'm going to let you go ahead and analyze this one first, and then I'll piggyback off whatever you say.
Oh, thanks, Jeremiah. Yeah, I always, as anybody who listens to this show enough knows, my barometer is, when a fighter's got a mismatch situation, if he takes care of business emphatically, the favorite, once he's already signed and in that fight, that's all really he can do. And Lomachenko passed that test for me Friday night, so I'm going to give him his props there for just scoring a big knockout. But he was in with somebody that there was nothing coming back at him. And for those of people out there who get squeamish with this type of analysis about, Croy was in the ring and boxing is the most dangerous sport, so they got some trouble calling what they see. I'm just going to go to a tweet by Sergey Lipinets about the fight right afterward. A tough fighter who just had a fight of the year candidate, with Peterson on national TV, who said, basically in so many words, Croy didn't come to fight. What the heck was he even doing in there? That's coming from a guy who was just in arguably the fight of the year within the last 30 days. And, if you just watch that was obvious. Again, I've given Lomachenko his props. He deserves them. I still give them to him for taking care of business. But with that understood, was there any reason, Gervonta Davis or Teofimo Lopez wouldn't have blasted Croy out like that? No, there's not. Anybody that thinks any differently, you're not being realistic. You're not analyzing it right. Croy just, there was nothing coming back at Lomachenko. Croy just didn't bring anything. So that's how it ended up like it did. And this is again in the sport about who's seeing. It's on ESPN Plus. The main event for this one got started on the East after 12:15 on ESPN Plus. How many people saw Lomachenko? You got to start, as boxing observers, we got to start being realistic about this. Because it really is bad and it's a concern. How many people really saw Lomachenko in the U.S. Friday night? Going over Saturday morning on the East. It couldn't have been many. It just couldn't have been with the other sports stuff going on. And it's a concern. It's a big problem. ESPN, wants to promote the ESPN Plus, and they've got boxing designated for that, and it doesn't seem that they care, how many people see this stuff. And it wasn't a good matchup. So it's just, for somebody who does have the ability of Lomachenko in the mythical pound for pound list, a lot of people have him number one who have that concern, or have him no worse than number two. You want the guy visible. You want the guy in big fights. That's why I was talking about creativity here. Lomachenko needs a big fight. People got outraged when I said, on Twitter, in theory, because we just had it with Mikey Garcia and Spence. Would you rather see Lomachenko fighting Crawford Friday night next Saturday night, instead of fighting Croy, and Crawford fighting Lomachenko instead of fighting Amir Khan? I don't care what anybody says. Why wouldn't you? They talk about Lomachenko's size and everything. He's a skilled guy. It doesn't mean he's necessarily going to win, but I'm just saying we're wasting time. We're wasting time here. Even these guys for their legacies could use some big fights.
Yep, absolutely, and I'm with you. I did say that. I figured it'd be a mid-round stoppage. My line of reasoning was that Lomachenko was going to be on a mission because of his, performances against Pedraza and Linares, which, it just kind of seemed not quite on par with his other performances, and that's what he did. But Croy's game plan to me was awful. I know that, people will say, oh, well, he had no chance either way. Yeah, that's fine, but I think if he would have taken an aggressive posture, he might have lasted a few more rounds. I mean, I've seen him aggressive in the past. I think he was more aggressive. I think he pressed the action against Ricky Burns. I know he was more aggressive against Jorge Linares. In the first fight, in the second fight, he was more aggressive as well. I just didn't understand one bit why he would just concede all that territory to Lomachenko and just let him. It's like Timothy Bradley was saying, and one place I thought he got right in his analysis was he was just like, hey, Lomachenko takes a few rounds, download all the data, and then he goes from there. Well, Croy just didn't give him much data to process and just allowed Lomachenko to back him up and bang him out. And I gotta say, I'm happy for Lomachenko getting the one-punch knockout. I do think he hits hard enough. I think he's proven that. He had the one-punch knockout over Roman Martinez. He had the one-punch stoppage against Jorge Linares, the body shots. In his debut against Ramirez, he had a one-punch stoppage on a body shot. I think he hits pretty good. Part of that, of course, is due to his timing and his accuracy and his speed. But he's a pretty good puncher, and like I pointed out on Twitter and Facebook, he would have 11 knockouts in his 13 victories had he not hurt his hand against Pirapeno, where I forget where he hurt his left hand, I think in the 4th, 5th, or 6th round, I can't remember now, and then he just ended up boxing with one hand and, winning every round anyways. But he does have pretty good pop, even at 135, but I'm glad he got the job done, and I do have to say that the referee's cam, it added to the effect of the knockout. Some people seem to be pretty squeamish about all this, but it's boxing. I don't know what you expect. I like those sort of knockouts. Yeah, Krolla's injured, he's hurt, but these guys are signing up for it, and this is what I'm signing up for as a fan. It's like, do you want to see that sort of stuff, or do you want to see these British type stoppages where a guy's getting, sort of hammered on the ropes and the guy's, just overly cautious and protecting the fighter? You got to balance these things out. I'm not saying you have to be sadistic and watch a guy, take an unnecessary amount of punishment, but you've got to have some balance there. There's got to be an in-between. And, the referee's cam to me just added to the effect, and frankly, I wasn't appalled by the sight at all. I was quite happy to see it. I thought it was an interesting viewpoint and kind of added a little, I don't know, personality to the knockout. But it is what it is, and Lomachenko, people can talk about the mandatory situation and whatnot, and we all acknowledge it. That's well, at least you and I acknowledge it. It's sort of bullshit. It was just a favor.
Total bullshit. Yeah, it's got to be. We have to address that as well.
Yeah, it's a favor for Eddie Hearn.
Right. And but you and I agree on that. And I'm glad you reminded me of that, Jeremiah, because there's so much to go over from this weekend, unfortunately, which are the problems with boxing. So, yeah, it started late. And then you have same thing like I was talking about the weight classes. You've got people who should know better, and I know you saw the same thing and were outraged, and you were absolutely right. Then they're trying to justify this mismatch by saying, well, Croy was his mandatory. What else is he supposed to do? First of all, Lomachenko also has a WBO lightweight alphabet belt. If he threw the WBA belt in the trash tomorrow, he'd still be an alphabet champ. And I don't mean Lomachenko's not a real lightweight champion. He's got the ring as well. But when you were just talking about belts here, he still have a belt, okay? And I don't even think I don't think Lomachenko needs any belt at this point in his career, the way boxing has devolved with what true champions mean and stuff. So I don't think he even needs any of them at this stage of his career. But he's got the ring, and he's got, WBO. And then these people say, well, he wants to unify. Look, when these belts get unified, it's like as frequently as a lunar eclipse style with 4 and all these interim titles and regular titles. And then when they do get unified, one of the alphabet organizations strips somebody within a day. Look at how quick Fury got stripped when he beat Klitschko. They were stripping him. They were stripping him of belts within the week. Terrence Crawford when he beat Ndongo. It goes on. It goes on and on. So the unification thing, they say that's all overblown nowadays. It just doesn't mean what it used to. Even though it's less frequent, it's just there's so many alphabet belts out there. So to justify this mismatch and say somehow that Lomachenko, I mean, he's going to do what his promoter tells him to do. So I'm not blaming him individually, but this fight was not necessary. It was not necessary because it was a quote-unquote mandatory by the WBA. And the final thing I'd say about that is the same people then who are saying with a straight face out there, or he had to take this fight, it was a mandatory. And then they get aggressive about it. And they say, don't you get that? It's simple. These are the same people that then are making fun of the WBA for making up the WBA regular belt in every division. So I got news for you, people. You can't have it both ways. Either the WBA is illegitimate and their orders are illegitimate and what they do is illegitimate, or they're legitimate. So if you believe they're not legitimate because they have regular titles and have ridiculous rankings, it doesn't matter what they say, that you got to fight somebody mandatory so-and-so. That doesn't matter then. They're either legitimate or they're not, and we know they're not legitimate. So you can't have it both ways.
Yeah. There's a lot of picking and choosing that goes on. And to be honest with you, if Lomachenko would have been like, no, forget that, get me somebody else other than Croy, I am sure with Top Rank's poll, they could have made somebody else happen. I almost guarantee it. I mean, look at the WBC, for instance. Again, they ordered Wilder and Fury for a rematch, or they ordered Golovkin to fight Charlo for a shot at Canelo Alvarez. Come on, man. I mean, listen, we have to acknowledge that these things are political in nature. I mean, there's a reason why the WBO and Bob Arum have such a tight relationship, and the WBA and Hearn, and the WBC and Heyman. It is what it is, and you have to acknowledge those sort of things, except it's like the Bible with so many Christians. They're just picking out, they're cherry picking. They're like, oh, I like this one, I don't like that one. I like this one, I don't like that one. You gotta take it for what it is. I mean, you just can't have it your way just because that's the way you want it. And I do want to point out another thing that. Yeah, and you reminded me of something else in regards to the ring belt. So I had talked about, and I know we had talked about in a previous episode here, where the Ring magazine had given, so I think this highlights why we should really put an emphasis on the number one and number two guy fighting each other to get a real championship. So the Ring magazine belt, which Vasyl Lomachenko now holds, and I know that, Mike likes to poke at me and prod at me on this show and talk about how I'm a Vasyl Lomachenko fanboy, and I make no bones about it. I really like Lomachenko. I think he's a fantastic fighter, one of the best that I've ever seen in terms of talent. But of course, I get a little weird when people start comparing him to legends and stuff, because I still want to see his career play out. I still think there's some questions to be answered. And again, I get accused of being a Lomachenko fanboy, and I am to a degree. I'm not saying that I'm wrong here, but the Ring title that Lomachenko now has he got that from beating Jorge Linares. But Jorge Linares picked it up by beating the number 3 ranked opponent for the Ring, which was Anthony Crolla. Okay? So Crolla, to me, DeHaan Zlaticanin was number 2 for the Ring at that time, and Crolla was number 3. Well, they allowed Jorge Linares to fight Anthony Crolla for the Ring championship. And it's easy to look back in retrospect and hindsight, right, is 2020. But I had said even at that time that Crolla should not be granted a Ring championship fight. He should have been the number 1 and number 2 guys. And I think that DeHaan Zlaticanin at that time would have beat Anthony Crolla. I don't know that for sure, but I think this is why you should emphasize the number 1 and number 2 guys before you allow these sort of things to happen. I don't know what you think, John.
Yeah, at the time I was okay with it, and I think the Ring policy of 1 versus 3 exceptions sometimes is okay, but that is one in hindsight I don't feel that good about, because Linares is a golden boy fighter too. So, the Ring for the most part with that built-in conflict, and I've said a lot of times, I'm glad Golden Boy saved the Ring. I still am. Some people will go far enough where they criticize that. I don't criticize that.
Some will say it's totally illegitimate.
Right, but that I do look back at that one, and at that time, again, even though and this makes me sad because lightweight is the traditional division, but with 17 divisions being ranked, including by the Ring and Transnational, at that time, the lightweight division was extremely weak. And, to pull out a Crolla, in a very weak lightweight division, and then make him fighting Linares for the ring belt. I agree. For me, it's a little more hindsight because I'm not totally down on the 1 versus 3 policy like Transnational is. I understand why they are, but I'm not as down. I think where the ring says you can make some exceptions, but I think you're right in hindsight. I've looked at that one in hindsight, and they didn't have to make the exception. The exception should not have been made there for Crolla. And you just look at his overall resume, and a lot of the Brits will then justify it and try to justify it and stuff. And you saw it Saturday night, even though Lomachenko's good. Because let's face it, we're being fair here in that Pedraza got blown out by Gervonta Davis, and he was able to hang in with Lomachenko much better than Crolla. I mean, that you could see that with your own eyes. So
yeah,
so there's a difference
Pedraza
there. Yeah, there's a difference there. In terms of how those guys performed, and what I'm getting around to is that, Crolla was really probably, and I don't think we did it, but with some of the people in the sport, hey, let's just face it, the guy was a bit of an overvalued fighter, and we're not saying it in hindsight. We've been saying it. Maybe some others who tried to argue for his status need to take a good long hard look at it, and what you pointed out about how he first got involved in that ring title fight at the top of the division.
Yeah, I just think I think, like you said, he was overvalued there. I think for Transnational at the time, I could be mistaken, but I think he was number 5, number 6, maybe number 4.
And that was more accurate. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But anyways, we'll move on here. And we'll start with the earliest main event, and that was Claressa Shields versus Christian Hammer. What'd you think of this fight, John? There was a lot of chit-chat about it on Twitter.
The build-up I thought was good. In this particular fight, I want to make clear, I thought, like I just said, like Lomachenko did, I think we have to give Claressa Shields credit for doing her job. She performed well in the fight. I think she's got everything to be proud of in the way she performed. And I think, Christina Hammer, she did what she could. She was just slightly overmatched there, but she had nothing to be embarrassed about or anything like that. But then here's where I get into then the other problems surrounding it, where I know you like to talk, Jeremiah, a lot about boxing shooting itself in the foot. And I think this became one of those instances because, but I have to bring the UFC up again, and I was watching this as it played out. I mean, I watch MMA too, and Dana White was against any women's division, any women being in MMA, and then Ronda Rousey popped up on Strikeforce, which was on Showtime then, and I saw her almost right off the bat, and she's arm-barring everybody out, and she's got this judo background, and she's an interesting character, and Dana White, to his credit, in other words, he reverses course. All of a sudden, he's into women's division in the UFC, having regular weight classes, having them fight, with the same rules as the men. So in other words, he started off on the wrong foot, but he got it, and he ended up with a superstar. Okay. Now let's go to boxing. We have, they put for just no reason, they start going with 2-minute rounds for the women, and they 10-round, title fights. So, it takes away from it right there. And then I got to call out Showtime a little bit, even though I don't have any problems with this crew. On one hand, they're promoting it as the biggest women's fight of all time, which arguably it was. And on the other hand, they got their second string announcing crew doing the fight. So, what I'm getting at here is Shields performed really well, but we've got 2-minute rounds. I actually agree with Dan Raphael when he tweeted out. I think this happens more in women's boxing than people realize. If it was 3-minute rounds, she would have gotten a stoppage. I think that is correct. You can't get as many knockouts when you got 2-minute rounds, and that's what hurts the women's game. So, what I'm just saying is there was just things surrounding this fight where boxing's just not presenting itself well, and there's no reason for it, on the women's side, that shouldn't be happening. And it didn't have to do with the fighters in the ring, but that don't like that I was seeing that really could easily be cleaned up and should be cleaned up. And I think the problem is the alphabets got involved. In other words, the women's game probably could have had an opportunity to even be quote unquote more pure than the men's game, because it was almost, starting more from scratch type of thing. You didn't really have anything until you had like Kathy Davis in the 70s, and then it would go in and out. And then you had Christy Martin kind of revive things in the mid 90s, when she was on the Don King cards. But what I'm, getting at there is the women's game could have had eight, they even have less fighters. I mean, they could have had the 8 weight classes, they could have not had the alphabets involved. And now we've got, women's interim titles and the WBC women's super middleweight title. And it's just boxing just shooting itself in the foot.
Yeah, and it's not like these alphabet organizations were all in. It's not like they put their chips in from the beginning. I mean, they're just going with the flow. Yeah, they're just going with the flow here. I mean, you hear, and it's all perspective. This is my thing with the fight is, to be honest with you, I didn't even watch it in full. I mean, to me, I don't know. It just felt like a bunch of people were trying to convince me to watch the WNBA finals, like the third WNBA finals. And I wasn't into it, to be honest with you. I mean, I watched a few rounds. I just, to me, Hogan and Munguia was more interesting. So was Vinechenko versus Kolke. I just didn't have a whole lot of interest in this fight. Again, it just felt like people were trying to convince me to watch the WNBA finals, and I just couldn't, I couldn't do it. But the thing about it too is, the thing that is starting to chat my ass is there's a lot of people already on the bandwagon saying, okay, because she's saying it, right? She's the greatest women's fighter of all time. This is my thing with that whole assessment is I don't know a single female boxing historian at all, okay? And so to say, okay, she's the greatest ever, I think it lacks perspective, and there's no frame of reference there to make that sort of judgment. Yeah, she's a 2-time Olympian, but somebody like Cecilia Brækhus and Amanda Serrano, they didn't have that luxury beforehand. So some of them had to learn on the job a bit longer beforehand. And somebody like Brækhus has been the quote unquote undisputed champion for nearly half a decade now. Serrano's won titles in 7 divisions. I don't even know what titles they are. So to me, there's a lot of perspective.
There's that. Just go ahead, Joe. But there's that Tiger Lily Fox and Marianne Owen. I think that they've always, when nobody was following the women's game. I mean, they're always up on that stuff, and they got everything down to the Kathy Davis and stuff. But I do that once in a while. If you really want to get into the weeds on the women's boxing, you can check them out. There used to be, it might even still be out there. There was a website like WBAN, but that's always good to check out for that. When once in a while when something like this comes up, yeah. But they would, I'm without even looking, I'm sure that they would debate that like you are. They're not going to automatically jump and say that just because of this win that Claressa Shields is the greatest women's fighter of all time.
Yeah, and they did a good job promoting it. I mean, I have to admit, when I went on Twitter, I was surprised at the amount of people who were watching it in comparison to the other fights that were going on. So, Shields gets her decision, and now it's a matter of where does she go next? I don't know, honestly. I mean, there's about 54 people ranked at 160 and 168 combined. The person who's ranked, I think, number 6 at 160 is like 4-12. So again, it's hard to say. I mean, this is where it gets real difficult because there's not a lot of name opponents for her. So my guess is maybe she'll wait for Savannah Marshall, the person who beat her in the amateurs. I think Shields so lost there. Maybe she'll try to bring Brækhus up. I don't honestly know. I just know that they're going to have to do something to keep her brand out in the open. And I wanted to move on to Joey Spencer. I think that was one of the earlier fights on one of the cards. Again, it was kind of hard to keep track of all this stuff. I did end up watching this.
Before you move on, just let's get to Spencer, but since we were on that card, before we move on, because it doesn't need to take more than a minute. Showtime. I kind of like the idea. as prelims to Shields and Hammer, they tried to run 2 heavyweight prospects. Otto Wallin was in against Kisner, this cruiserweight who looked completely out of shape. And, now Wallin's from Sweden. Pro boxing was banned in Sweden, from 1970 to 2007. But, he has a heavyweight against an overmatched guy. Even just in the 2 rounds this was going on, there was a headbutt cut that stopped it, just like the Quillen and Truax, which we'll get to later. But then the Kisner guy didn't want to go on. But the point is, even in the little bit of quote-unquote action there was, Wallin with this totally overmatched guy was like jabbing, moving in and out and grabbing. And I just, in that brief point that I saw there, this is all the bad of the weekend, I mean, he should have been on this guy, trying to get him out of there from the moment that bell rang. He had him totally overmatched size and power-wise. And he's jabbing him, grabbing, moving in and out, and then, it gets no contest because of this headbutt. And it just, even in the little bit he was out there, I mean, it just wasn't good. It just wasn't good. There was no indication that this is somebody you want to see again, that's going to be some kind of factor. And then you had Jermaine Franklin, the American, he's fighting Rydell Booker, who had been in prison for 12 years, who did have some amateur pedigree, but ironically lost to James Toney. James Toney was so good, like we talk about, he could fight at heavyweight and make these guys miss just standing there. But Booker looked like more of the prospect than Franklin. He faded in the second half of the fight, but Franklin was not in good shape. He wasn't punching with authority. It went the distance. Just dreadful. I mean, just simply dreadful. Neither Wallin or Franklin showed me anything. Even though Wallin's appearance was so brief, neither of them showed anything to show that they're any kind of serious prospect. So, Showtime's got them out there, and it was just more of the bad.
Yes, sir. Yeah, no, I'm with you, man. It's like watching some of these guys. You're just thinking to yourself, well, there's not much upside there, because inevitably you pit them in your mind against guys that are highly ranked, especially the top dogs, and you're just like, all right, well, I mean, he'll have fun fighting the Tom Schwarzes of the world after Schwarz gets beat up by Tyson Fury. I mean, to me, that's the sort of level he might get to. So yeah, not impressive performances all the way around. And the Kisner just, come on, man. Kisner, I'm not even going to say much, but you got to do. Come on. Yeah, no, that was horrible.
Here's one thing I'll say, because I told you that's going to be my new theme, and since they were on the same TV network, I'm going to say that something could have been done. I've got an idea for a wildly radical vision. How about if you could have had Jermaine Franklin actually fighting Otto Wallin on that card Saturday night instead of what we got? I mean, it might not have even been a great fight, but what a crazy idea that maybe Showtime actually has Wallin, who's undefeated, fight Franklin, who's undefeated, and let's see who might be worthy of going forward instead of who they had him in with, and
yeah, you can't have some Showbox, the new generation type stuff on there,
right? I mean, just garbage.
Come on.
Just absolute garbage.
Yeah. Fuck that. But yeah, we'll move on.
Okay, move on now. We can move on.
Yeah, but we will move on to another shitty performance. And I'm like you. I do like Joey Spencer. I think the guy's got quick hands. He's got good power. He's pretty accurate with his shots. But, and it is a big but, he looked as if he just really didn't take the guy seriously at all. I don't even remember his opponent's name. I'm not even going to bother pulling it up. But Joey Spencer, he looked like he had... Yeah. He was a former Marine or something and had a nice little tire around the midsection. Spencer, to me, has a lot of natural goods. Again, quick hands, good power, pretty accurate. But he looked like he didn't take the opponent all that seriously. He hurt Vazquez in the first round. And I think mentally he downshifted, like, I'll get this guy out of there eventually. And Vazquez, to his credit, just kept plugging away. And it really wasn't a good performance by Joey Spencer. He could have gotten the guy out of there if he would have just upshifted a little bit. I mean, he had the guy hurt multiple times on body shots, had him hurt a few times to the head in the last round. To me, Spencer could have done a lot more. I just, it's almost a theme with this show, and maybe I'll write that into the title, but these guys, it's like they coast along, and this is the sort of thing that you like to see from the Lomachenkos and Golovkins of the world. The guys who are just, they don't let their guys hang around. They just go out there and get the job done and don't let them linger. I mean, because what happens is when you do let them hang around, first off, no matter how bad a guy is, and we've seen it in the heavyweight division for years, you risk the run of losing that fight. You never know, because I even saw it with Vasquez a little bit, there for, I think in the middle of the fight where you just see it click mentally where he's like, all right, well, this guy isn't that good, right? He isn't what I thought he might be. And sometimes they get enough confidence to where they can upset the apple cart. That's happened numerous times in the past, so even though Vasquez was smaller and clearly the talent was nowhere, in the same, in the same galaxy as Joey Spencer's, he just, sometimes you can get upset. I mean, taking a punch is one of those things that, again, it's happened numerous times. You never really know, but I just was disappointed with Spencer. I really think he should have just upshifted, got the guy out of there, and moved on with the damn thing, but he let him linger and let him bang on him in the ropes a little bit. I didn't mind it in the first round. I could deal with it if you're just kind of feeling a guy out, seeing what he's got, what kind of power he has. But he just did it the whole fight and ended up with a decision that he didn't need. And another criticism of Spencer that I have is he has it almost like Floyd Mayweather-esque stance with his defense. And again, I don't mind that from movers or from a guy who's going to get right up in your face. But if you're doing it and you're not really slipping and countering consistently, it just, to me, it looks like one of those styles where eventually he's going to get outworked. Anyways, on to you, John.
Yeah, I that was my concern with the performance. Just what you finished with is, I agree. At first, I thought he was carrying him or something, but then it just seemed that he didn't want to work, and I did see like he almost was doing more of that pot shotting type of a thing, which his skills he totally doesn't need. He's a guy, to me, I'm super high on him. He's only 19. I'm not going to give up on him after one performance, but to me, he's been with the Jogbo, one of the best couple of prospects in boxing. But don't get me wrong, I didn't want to be, but as it played out, I was very disappointed with the performance. I thought he was just carrying Vasquez the first couple of rounds, and then when it went on, I saw what you did. I was like, he just doesn't seem to want to work hard enough, and I'll admit I'm making up an excuse for him, but looking at the corner, even instructing him to throw to the body even late in the fight, and the way he fought, the only excuse I could come up with is if he's got a bad hand or something like that, because he was throwing a lot of body shots. He didn't seem to want to go to the head as much, and he wasn't working. I'm not saying that happened. I have no evidence of that. I'll be the first to tell you, but it crossed my mind at the end. I thought that's about the only other thing I can think of. But let's say it's not the hand. He just wasn't working hard enough to get the guy out of there. And then you had the practical problem with that kind of a performance. Things were going poorly with the PBC card as it had to get shifted initially during the Kolke and Vinechenko fight to FS2, which nobody basically gets. And then it was just on the app because a 10-4 in the 7th Mets-Braves game was running long. And then, by the time it got to Joey Spencer and then back on FS1, it was after midnight on the East Coast. So, again, but this is where this stuff matters. So I'm on the East Coast, so I'm sitting there. It's scheduled for 6 instead of 4 for some reason, which I say, based on that opponent, I don't know why it was a 6. They probably thought Spencer was going to take him out, but that's the thing, he didn't. So we're sitting there on the East at 12:15 a.m. or something like that, after all these other fights have been going on that night, and we've got Spencer playing around with this Vasquez guy who, like you said, who looks out of shape. He's 30 years old, and not working to get him out of there. It's just not the type of thing that's going to bring more fans back. It's not going to get a buzz going for you. I don't know why in the world some people are criticizing him. I mean, give Ray Mancini credit for calling it out. I mean, Mancini on these PBC broadcasts, it's good that PBC's got him there and keeping him there, or Fox, because he's saying, you know, if a fight's garbage, he's saying it, or if a better opponent needs to be there, he's saying it. He's calling it out. We need more of that. We don't need guys broadcasting infomercials. We've got all kinds of infomercial announcers out there. So he was telling about how bad the performance was by Spencer, and, you know, he should have been getting that guy out of there, and he was telling the truth. So, you know, I hope at Joey Spencer's age, and I believe in the ability, and he seems to market himself pretty well. I see what he does on Twitter and things, and I think that's a good thing. He works locally in Michigan, getting himself out there. But, you know, you got to do it in the ring, and nobody's perfect. But it's against an opponent like that, you know, it's got to be better. Unless there's some hand injury we don't know about or something, you know, we need to see more.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, speaking of two guys who did pretty good job. I mean, it wasn't great, of course, but yeah, Vinechenko versus Jack Kolke. Kolke is one of those guys who actually has turned out surprisingly good. I mean, I'm not calling him some top flight operator. He's certainly not that, but he's shown gutsy performances against a few guys now. I mean, he knocked Andrade down. Ended up losing a split decision, though I thought that was a unanimous decision for Andrade. You know, now the Vinechenko performance. Did you catch this? I mean, I had a hard time. I didn't catch all of it, to be honest with you. I mean, again, it was hard to digest all of what was going on at that time. I think that the Shields Hammer fight was going on, along with Hogan and Munguia. So I didn't get to catch all of this, but from what I saw, it looked like a pretty good fight. Kolke seemed like he was landing the uppercut pretty well. Vinechenko seemed like he was having a hard time adjusting to it sometimes. But to me, again, in what I saw, Vinechenko looked like he was sharp enough and crisp enough with his combinations to eke out a decision here. I don't know. Did you catch all of this?
Yeah, I pretty much from the beginning, when it was going back and forth with the FS2, FS1, I just missed a little of the very beginning, but then I did catch it early on the rest of the way, and that's where that fight was a little deceptive, because it did start out as a boring fight. And I've seen Vinechenko look a lot better. We already kind of addressed this with Putin, even though their styles are different still. They're from the old Soviet bloc countries, even though one's Ukrainian, one's Russian. Vinechenko was doing too much of that in and out stuff, not wanting to get hit. And again, it's not that you want to get hit, but especially, you know, he's at his best when he does put some pressure on you, some skilled pressure. And he was doing the Eastern European in and out amateur type stuff with Kolke, who's not a puncher. And Mancini was calling him out on it, which I like that, because that's what I find interesting is, you know, Ray Mancini comes from a golden era of boxing in the early 80s. I mean, it's not.
Yeah, he knew what fight was like.
Right. He knows. I mean, he's from that era, and, you know, he was fighting Arguello when he was 20 years old. And, you know, nobody's going to question that. So, you know, when he's saying it from a good boxing perspective, but a different boxing perspective. And I think he's right. Some younger people were saying, well, I don't know about where Mancini's coming from in here, but he's right. And it's not being too hard on anybody. He was calling that out. He's saying, hey, look, you know, this is not the style of fighting I learned. You know, when you're trying to put some pressure on somebody, look to get knockouts, you know, there's this moving in and out, you know, you don't want to do any engaging and, you know, stay in the pocket. And like you said about Tony, you know, defending and then throwing back, you know, exchanging some punches. And, you know, Vinechenko was doing that worse than I'd seen him doing. And Kolke's not a puncher, so that was a little disappointing. Now, what happened later in the fight, which might have been Jeremiah around when you tuned in, is it was a surprise to everybody, but it was legit. You know, Kolke, he hung in there, and then it got around the 10th, 11th round. He started landing some big shots on Vinechenko, even though he's not a puncher, and kind of rocked him a little bit a couple of times, and was coming on strong there at the end, but it was too late. You know, Vinechenko had already, you know, piled up a good lead, and he deserved the decision. I do worry a little bit. I think you're right about Kolke. He's proven that he can hang in with some people, and with all the, you know, talent that is around in boxing around the 154, 160 pounds, I'm not sure this is a good thing. We might be seeing him in with some we might be seeing him in with some names in the future because he's proved some durability, but he's not a puncher and he's not going to get anybody out of there. And he's one of those guys that probably does just enough to lose. But I agree with you. He's proven a competence to hang in with some very tough opposition because he fought again, lost, but he fought Soljeski as well. Beat Hogan, which we're going to talk about that fight. Not saying Hogan's a world beater, but he's got that win. Went the distance with Vinechenko, went the distance with Andrade. So, he's proven durability, and I have a feeling we're going to be seeing more of him against some names.
Yep, and I don't care, honestly. I mean, so long as they match him right, I don't care. He doesn't deserve any of the the best of the best guys. But if they pair him correctly, I don't mind. But again, I don't want to see him against the Golovkins or Alvarez's or Herds of the world. Tone it down with that sort of stuff.
Exactly.
But speaking of a top flight operator, or at least what was perceived to be one, you had Jaime Munguia versus Dennis Hogan. On DAZN. I'm going to give you the floor with this one, John.
I think I just got a feeling that I probably saw this one a little differently than some people. I thought, and I'll, full disclosure, I've seen Hogan. I didn't think he was very good. I still don't really think he's that good. But I thought Munguia would be able to blast out a guy like that. But what I saw that I think is differently than other people, and I'm not saying Munguia did any spectacular work in this fight because he didn't, but I thought Hogan got more credit for his work than he deserved. Except for landing some decent punches in the 11th round. I thought he was mostly in there in kind of a survival type mode. He was celebrating from round one when the round finished at the end. And, he's all justifying it now in his camp. Like, we thought we won. We thought we were winning the whole time. I thought the guy was on kind of a survival mission. And you listen to his corner later in the fight and go ahead and look at the replay, if anybody wants to check it out again. His corner is telling him late in the fight, you're being too defensive. In other words, you talk about some of the stuff Munguia's corner was saying to him, but Hogan's own corner was telling him you're being too defensive, which, to me is code word of, he didn't, now Munguia is a puncher. I'm not saying Hogan, who's not a puncher, should be in there, trying to brawl with Munguia. That doesn't make any sense. I get that, and I'm not going to blame him. But, he was kind of doing the Liam Smith type of game plan, but Liam Smith was willing to throw more punches, more serious punches, and then he took more at the end. And Munguia was getting close to stopping him, but I think that Liam Smith was really, to me, even though they might have said the Hogan fight was, well, it was closer, but I thought Hogan was on more of a survival type mission. So for what his abilities were, I mean, I'm not even saying he's fighting in Mexico. How critical can you be of that? But, if somebody would have scored the fight for him, I'm not saying that that's crazy. If somebody had a draw, I'm not saying it's crazy, but I don't think scoring it for Munguia is crazy either. So my final thing on that is I don't think it was that good of a fight. I don't need to see it again. I think like a Spencer, Munguia's young. Spencer, of course, got a lot less experience, but these are very young guys. I'll wait to pass more judgment on Munguia when he's in with somebody that's not necessarily has to slug with him, but gonna be engaging with him, and to me really, more in to throw some punches and try to do more.
Yeah, and I will say that I've been slightly more critical of Munguia than John has, and I'm still slightly more critical than him. I thought, again, a lot of people were calling it. You had people calling it a robbery, and I didn't go that far. I did see Hogan has landed a lot of clean punches. He was turning Munguia's head around at certain points, and there was some concern, like you said, with the things that Munguia was saying in the corner. I think at one point he asked whether or not he was winning, and I knew that Hogan wasn't going to get the decision regardless. My thing is as I watch the fight, I try not to get sucked into the DAZN commentators where, they were putting a lot of emphasis on what Hogan was doing. Munguia was being aggressive, and he did land, the harder shots of the two. But I just don't think. I'm going to go back to what I said previously. I just don't think Munguia can improve much at all from here on out. I think he just is what he is. I mean, he's got slow feet. He doesn't glide around the ring. He steps around the ring, and this is why he has so much trouble, even with guys who are not top quality boxers. He just has a hard time following him around, and he gets caught with the right hand far too often. Maybe if the kid's only 22 years old. Maybe you can, take a year off and just like my buddy Eric Duran said. Take a year off and just work on everything that he's had. I mean, mostly I'd work on his footwork, but I just think he is what he is at this point. And I think his handlers probably know that too. And I think that maybe you got to start thinking about cashing him out, because if you don't, there's a real possibility that he gets upset by one of these guys, and then you're not ruining his marketability, but you're certainly hampering it. I don't have much confidence in Munguia against the best guys at 154 or 160. I think possibly he could beat somebody like Tony Harrison, whose chin is not that good, but somebody like Hurd or Lara or a lot of these guys. I mean, I just don't think that he's on that level, and I think if they pair him with Alvarez anytime soon, I think that's a slaughter personally.
Yeah, well, he's got things to work on. One thing, I usually don't like to necessarily speculate on this too much, but on this one I do feel okay when I've seen how it's gone. Munguia's, and sometimes we know the father thing can be bad, or the long-time trainer that goes back to the amateurs. But there have been pairings, I was thinking about this today, that have worked out well, and it seemed to me, and I saw Munguia early on, and that was the case when he blew away Saddam Ali, who was a good fighter. His father was a run of the mill Mexican heavyweight, a club fighter type, but his father had trained him the whole way. And all of a sudden, he gets then to the highest levels and he's winning, and they bring in Alcazar to start training him. And he hasn't looked as good. And I'm just thinking, look, Canelo was with the Reynosos, from when he was a kid, basically. Marvin Hagler was with the Petronellis the whole time. Joe Calzaghe was trained by his father, who never even boxed. He just learned from books. Andre Ward was with Virgil Hunter going back to the amateurs. What I'm saying is, it doesn't always work, but sometimes there's relationships that go way back. They know the person the best, and it does work, and it can work on the highest level. And I just didn't see with Munguia where the need to change came in, and I don't like the way he's looked as much since. And I'm not saying that's all it, but this is a case where I'm saying, what do you need Alcazar in there for? Get rid of him. Let him go back to being trained by his father. Then they'll talk about bringing other guys in. But I'm thinking, why? Just go back to what you were doing. I tend to agree, like what you've said, Jeremiah, and some others. But I think where I disagree is that I think this will get him farther than some people think. But I agree with you. Just go back to what you were. I think what he was can be okay, because he's a big 154 or even 160-pound middleweight who's got power. And he may be getting out boxing some fights, and he may take some people out, and then he may just get some people out of there right off the bat. I don't know, exactly. I haven't had a final conclusion of, how far I think he can go, but I think at his young age, he hasn't taken any beatings or anything. I think he could still be fine, but I think go back to what you were doing. His father was training him fine. His father's still there, but I just don't see why he can't be the lead trainer at this point.
Okay, and not much to say on the PBC headliner. I mean, Peter Quillen versus Truax, they were just filling each other out, and Truax got a cut. I don't know what else there is to say. I mean, it's disappointing. Really, you can't really read much into whatever was happening. I was surprised that Truax looked bigger than Quillen, but, again, this result is unsatisfactory, and I don't know what else to say. You got anything?
Yeah, there was a big problem here because, you're getting delayed by baseball. It went to FS2 for a while. And, this was the competitive fight on paper of the weekend, Quillen and Truax, a good matchup. And the fight did not start on the East Coast till 1:16 in the morning on FS1. So, it's not on regular Fox. It's on FS1. It had been on FS2 briefly because of a baseball game. And then it comes on to FS1. It's 1:16 a.m. in the East. I mean, you had your most competitive matchup of the weekend. And, that's a miss for PBC because, it didn't work out anyway. But even if it would have been fight of the year, how many people would have seen it? And, that's just a big miss. I did think, it was hard to tell a lot, but I thought Quillen looked pretty sharp in the first two rounds. No way, of course, to make any certain prediction as to what would have happened, but I thought he looked pretty sharp in the first two rounds. Then we always find these things out, and some people say, oh, well, IBF and it's a mandatory and all that, but we know that's nonsense. I do listen to this because it's, announcers doing PBC stuff. To me, this was the first I'd heard it straight out said, they were saying then when the bell rang for that fight that the winner of this fight's going to get, Caleb Plant. And when the PBC announcers say that, I take that seriously because that means that they're trying to tell us something. So I don't know if they're going to do this one again, or they can dodge that if they want Quillen to get the Plant assignment. And I'm presuming Plant's going to beat Mike Lee in July because I just don't think Mike Lee brings hardly anything to the table. If you've ever seen him fight, you'll know why. No disrespect meant, but you just got to call it like you see it. So I did make a little mental note there that one of these guys may be getting Caleb Plant down the road, whether we asked for that fight or not.
Lovely. Should sell pretty well, though. You got two white guys there. Anyways, we'll move on to next weekend, and then this is another really, really, really good card. I mean, just the year has been just stunning so far. I mean, tons of whatever. Anyways, we got Teofimo Lopez versus Edis Tatley. Tatley is I believe he's Finnish. Maybe I'm mistaken there.
No, you're correct. Yep.
Okay, I've actually seen Tatley, and I made a list of the top 25 best defensive fighters in the game, and I think that was 3 years ago, and I actually had Tatley near the bottom of that list. And he's a pretty slick guy. I mean, he's pretty slick. I mean, he's got good footwork, but I mean, this is a blowout. I mean, I think the odds are closer than they should be, to be honest with you. Tatley is he's a European level fighter. I believe he's even the European champion, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I'm wrong there, but I think he's smaller than Lopez. I see this as a blowout.
Yeah, I see it as a blowout too. And when some people were trying to dispute that when the fight was signed, and I was immediately advocating, come on, this is a blowout. This is no pay-per-view attraction. Even though I've come to really, really like what Teofimo Lopez brings to the table, I'm like most people have gotten. The guy really interests me. I think it's a blowout. Odds I've seen, like Triple H Sport New Jersey, which has a lot of boxing on there. That's, I believe, ultimately Caesar's site. The one they use, they've got him like a minus 2,500 favorite, Lopez. So that's mismatched territory. So it's not competitive. Lopez should blow him out. I would like the drums beaten for Lopez and Lomachenko. We need some of these top guys in boxing. We need worthy fights for them that fans are interested in, and fans are willing to get up for, and maybe on certain occasions, even though I wish we didn't have pay-per-view, maybe would be worthy of a pay-per-view. So, I don't want any more delays. Now, even though it's a good fight, now all of a sudden I see Top Ranks talking about Comey and Teofimo Lopez if he wins, and they're not talking about, it was supposed to be Comey and Lomachenko, and then all of a sudden, it's Top Rank. It changes. All of a sudden, one day later, it changes out of nowhere. And I have, again, it's them saying it, so I have to pay attention. Are they trying to tell us something here? But, I think we're waiting around. There's too much marination. I mean, Lomachenko is going to be getting older. Give me Lomachenko Lopez there. If Lopez gets outboxed and he's not ready, it's like Canelo with Mayweather. I mean, I don't see where it's going to hurt his career or ruin his career or anything. I mean, he's fighting the top guy in Lomachenko, and if he performs better than expected, he's a superstar. So, and for Lomachenko needs a big fight. So, let's stop all the way. The only fear that
Yeah. Yeah, the fear there is if, Lopez turns out not to have a great chin and he gets starched, that might mentally affect him. But I'm like you. I don't think that would happen. I do think Lopez would be, pretty damn competitive and certainly more so than Crolla. And, I don't have any problem with him taking that fight at all. So, I mean, if they're talking about Comey versus Lopez, that tells me that Lomachenko is a possibility. Because Lomachenko obviously wants to unify. They need to get him they need to get him into something interesting because we don't know what Mikey Garcia is going to do and or what Luke Campbell might do. So yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all. And here's to hoping that it happens because Lopez, just like you think, he's a more interesting opponent than just about anyone in the division right now. Minus Garcia. Comey, I think, is a real good challenge too. Again, I don't mind either one of those. It's just a matter of putting on something interesting for Lomachenko because Lomachenko, to his credit, is actually a guy who wants to fight the best fighters in any given division, and that's why he called out Mikey Garcia afterwards. But again, we can't bank on that. So that fight to me would prove interesting. But yeah, this is a mismatch. Lopez will score a knockout and he'll move on. But
I don't want to pay for it, and I don't blame any fans that don't want to because it's not a pay-per-view worthy card. But with that said, I hope because Lopez is interesting and he's bringing some excitement that at least if this fight's going to be on there, Levy blows away Tatley. Not because I have any animosity towards Tatley particularly, but I want the Lopez train to roll on. Boxing needs it right now.
Yep. And speaking of another train to roll on, we got Shakur Stevenson versus Christopher Diaz. Diaz was viewed as a prospect himself, fighting out of Puerto Rico. He is currently 24-1 with 16 knockouts. He was in with a vacant. Well, no surprise there, right? Even though it was no surprise. I mean, he was in against a vacant shot against Masayuki Ito. He ended up losing that fight. I thought he was the favorite going into that fight, though those details are kind of fuzzy to me. And he's fighting Stevenson, who I think looks pretty damn good so far. And again, to talk about the train, I think the Stevenson train rolls on here.
Yeah, Stevenson got off to a little bit of a slow start to me, even though he was very young because he had such a good amateur pedigree, Olympic silver medalist. But I love the way he's picked it up lately. I hope in that sense he continues on. Of course, some out of the ring problems surfaced from like a year back. With any of these guys that have that, be it Stevenson, Kovalev, or whatever, I'm not condoning any of the behaviors, but boxing being as chaotic as it is already, I'm just going to throw this out there as a philosophical thing because I've thought about this. I think boxing not being organized under one body or anything like that, I think unless it's something that falls with the athletic commission, like actually in the ring or around competition or having to do with competition, I think unlike, say, like the NFL or the MLB, boxing ought to stay out of it, okay? It doesn't mean condone the behavior, but I think boxing's position should be we have to let the legal system take its course. We don't have one organized body. It's at a competition, and we're not gonna make behavioral edicts as boxing. And I don't mean it should be condoning bad behavior, but this is boxing. We know all the problems. I don't see how boxing does it, and I think for boxing to even try will just make things worse because it's so chaotic as it is. Look at a corporate entity like the NFL and all the problems that they've had trying to police, out of competition behavior. And I'm not even necessarily saying they should. I'm just saying, look at, how organized they are and they're the biggest sports corporation in the world and look at all the problems they have. So can you imagine boxing trying to get into that?
No, I can't. I can't. It can't even police it. It can't even police itself, so
right.
How's it going to?
Right. So I'm just saying, I'm just saying not condoning, not condemning, like in other words, we don't want assault or we don't want sexual assault, Kovalev's being accused. I'm just saying that let the legal system do it in boxing's case. And then, in other words, if either of these guys are convicted, they won't be able to fight because, they would be in jail. And if their sentence was not jail and there's not an order prohibiting them to fight, then they can fight. And that's the way boxing is going to have to treat it, I think.
Yeah, and though I think the video shows that Stevenson did something pretty bad, like you said, let the legal system hash it out. I mean, we again, you can say, hey, I don't like Stevenson because of this. That's fine.
That's a fan choice.
Some of the moral,
right?
yes, some of the moral grandstanding that I see, like, oh, he shouldn't be fighting with that. I mean, it's been like you said, it's been like a year since this was all passed. It's bad behavior. You can choose whether or not you like him or dislike him.
Right.
But let him get the due process. We rely on that stuff. Don't circumvent it. Again, if you want to say, hey, I don't like him, again, that's fine. But just pump the brakes with some of this stuff.
I agree.
Yes.
I think that's the perfect way to solve it. Is exactly that. As a fan, you have your pocketbook, your wallet, and you say, yeah, you have the right to choose and say, I don't want to support Kovalev. I don't want to support Stevenson. That's a legit choice. You can do that, but
it's like
in terms of whether they're going to fight or not, let the legal system take care of it.
Yes, use your dollars. Use your dollars in a democratic way. You can use your dollars and say, like you said, I choose not to purchase a ticket. I choose not to buy a pay-per-view. Again, that's your way of protesting. Then do so. Again. You don't need to get on your high horse, and I mean, we all have skeletons in our closet anyways, but, you don't have to get on your high horse and complain constantly about it. Let it take its course. Anyways, we'll move on to the main event to that card, and it's Terrence Crawford against Amir King Khan. And this is a pay-per-view, shouldn't be. Crawford's going to win this fight. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah, I think Crawford stops him. I don't know, even to this moment, I don't know why this is supposed to be a pay-per-view fight. Like, seriously. I mean, I suppose some of it is, with Khan and what they're trying to get out of him in the UK, but, it's going to be, the fight will be in the middle of the night there. I just, Khan's already damaged goods really at this point in his career. I just don't. I don't. To their credit, I don't really see the UK people buying in this time. Crawford. He didn't sell against Postol, and that was a good fight. And I'm not saying necessarily should. Hey, pay-per-views are expensive. But just because Bob Arum and Top Rank want Crawford to be pay-per-view, doesn't mean he is. And I think they just looked at the Jose Benavides numbers where he had the highest. I think that was the Heisman ceremony lead, I think, wasn't it? Yeah, because Lopez was on that card too. He did get a good number, but I think I know what Bob Arum and Top Rank are looking at. They're doing a percentage formula, and they're saying usually, we could capture blank percent of what he did on regular ESPN, and that's a pretty good payday for us and him. I don't think it's going to work though on this one. I just don't think that is going to play out that way. I don't think this pay-per-view is going to sell. It shouldn't be on there. All you got to do is look at Khan and Samuel Vargas, which was his fight before this. Vargas, you just saw get decision by Colazzo. Khan got dropped. I mean, he got dropped. He didn't look good. I mean, how does that prepare him and show he's a worthy Terrence Crawford opponent at this point? This is just simply not a pay-per-view fight.
Yep, absolutely. And again, I think I pretty much summed it up in the beginning here. I mean, it's just a matter of time. I mean, Khan is a damn good fighter. He's got good hand speed. I mean, he's shown his level of ability. I mean, if he had a good chin. The guy is like a pound for pound talent. I mean, but not anymore. I mean, he's a damn good fighter. That's fine. But again, it's just a matter of time when he gets caught, and then it's going to be the end of the road for him. But
yeah, that's why I think right. And right, Khan has had abilities. He's beaten plenty of good fighters. He's very fast. In terms of the boxing part of it, and again, I think some people are not getting this who should know better. Then I agree. Amir Khan is very fast, but what they don't get about this is Terrence Crawford started his career as a lightweight. Just because he's at welterweight now doesn't mean that Khan is going to have his normal speed advantage. I'm not saying he might not be still a little bit faster than Crawford, but Crawford was a lightweight. It's going to be comparable, and then all Crawford's other advantages are going to take effect. So, I just don't see the path for Khan here.
Yep, spot on again. Anyways, for the final fight of the other card we got that night is Danny Garcia versus Adrian Granados. Granados he's a go-getter. I mean, he's a work rate kind of guy, not big power. He's fought closely with some good fighters in the past. But again, he's had some tough fights. Previously, Danny Garcia, to his credit, he does do pretty well against this level of opposition. He's not usually great, but I expect him to get the job done here as well. I'm just wanting to see whether or not he can stop Granados.
Yeah, I agree, Jeremiah. You would say normally going into this fight that's not going to happen, but I don't feel good about the status of boxing that it does come down to this. But I think the Crawford-Khan pay-per-view is a dog. It's just not a pay-per-view fight. So I let the numbers prove me wrong, but I'm writing that off. I mean, I don't think that goes anywhere Saturday night. So we've got Garcia-Granados on Fox. To me, that's what, the majority of the people are going to be watching. Surely more are going to be watching it than Crawford and Khan. So, they're kind of, I don't think it's an exaggeration. This is a regular broadcast TV date. There's kind of a lot for boxing riding on it, even though it's not the greatest matchup on paper going in. And that's where I think it's then comes down to Danny Garcia usually doesn't pick up his pace as much as a lot of times you'd like, but if he could stop Granados, he could greatly help himself, provide something entertaining for boxing on the Saturday night where that's going to be the most watched fight, like it or not. And I think there's a relative level of importance there, and the division's so strong that Garcia needs something like that.
Yes, sir. And I'm just waiting to see if the knockout comes. That's my only concern. Anyways, with that said, I'm going to wrap this show up. I appreciate every single person who tunes in week in and week out. I mean, we get a surprising amount of people who listen to this show, and again, we really appreciate it. I mean, if you ever have want to do a Q&A or something, or just chime in and give us some feedback, and also we can be found on iTunes, iHeart, Spreaker, Stitcher, anywhere and everywhere else you can find us, or you have a preferred listening platform, give us a thumbs up, give us a rating, et cetera, et cetera. Send me a direct message. You can find John on Twitter. He's pretty active on there. You can find me on Facebook. That's my preferred method of communications, and we're pretty receptive to all this. I mean, we're willing to communicate. We're pretty open-minded about all that stuff, and I hope you're getting that impression listening to us as well. And if not, feel free to criticize me too. I can take it. We both have thick skin. John has to have thick skin. He's in a tough profession.
It's right. It thickens it up real quick.
Yeah, but with that said, I want to thank John. I want to thank everybody who listens. So have a good night, everyone.